Now, South Africa's motor industry sales growth seems to have pulled a handbrake in 2024. That as new vehicle sales hit a slump in January, marking the sixth consecutive month of decline. NAMSA CEO Michael Mabasa warns of uncertain environment for exports as vehicle exports also started the year off on a weak note, down 2.1%. Now, with the global economic weakness, geopolitical tensions and national elections looming, it seems that the automotive industry will continue to face challenges. Joining us to delve into the factors that are contributing to this is editor-at-large for Financial Mail, David Furlonger. David, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we've seen this new vehicle sales data, David. It hasn't been great, but is the data often strong in January?
It's generally not great in January because obviously we're coming out of a holiday period, so December and January are always questionable months. But the comparison, of course, is year on year. So we're talking about this January versus the previous January, and to be down 3.8%. I mean, it doesn't sound a lot, and it's only a couple of thousand vehicles, but it's the trend. And as you said, it's the 6th month in a row that year-on-year sales have been down, so that is worrying.
I have to ask you, David, if all of this has to do with the interest rate environment, or if there are other factors that are playing into the decision that passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles are being sold at.
If you break down those figures, the commercial vehicles market is actually fairly, I don't want to say solid, but it's held its ground. It's car sales which have come down very sharply, 6.7% compared to the previous January. So it's mostly individual consumers who are struggling to buy. More and more of them are going into the used market. So that is where we're seeing most of the pain. Last year when the market was down, heavy truck sales were up quite sharply, but even they are now expected to go down. Now, clearly interest rates have a lot to do with it, but it's general consumer confidence, business confidence, consumer confidence. We've got a national election coming in this year, which really is putting the mockers on most people's confidence, which is why most of the analysts are saying if there is going to be growth this year, it will come in the second half of the year once we get some sort of clarity as to what's going to go on after the election.
I'll also ask you about new vehicle sales inflation. And I'm wondering if it's also possible here that the reason why consumers are leaning towards used vehicles or second-hand vehicles is that new vehicles, David, have just become too expensive.
The inflation rate for new vehicles actually traditionally has lagged inflation, consumer inflation, for the last few years. And in fact, used vehicle prices have gone up faster because there are fewer good used vehicles available. So I think the new vehicle manufacturers or the motor companies have done a pretty good job in keeping down vehicle price inflation. Clearly it has something to do with it, but it's that overall sense of uncertainty and lack of confidence, which I think is the main problem.
We also are seeing exports under pressure. And what does that tell us about global demand?
Well, let's not forget that South Africa, although we've got an election, Britain's got an election coming, the US has got an election coming. I was told by a Belgian 2 days ago that Belgium has an election coming. I wouldn't know. I don't follow Belgium terribly closely, I'm sorry to say, but there are elections all over the place. Plus the fact that we've got the problems in the Middle East, we've still got European problems with Russia and Ukraine. So there's global uncertainty at the moment. So yeah, we started off badly. I mean, 2 or 3% down. I can't remember the exact figure. But again, we started off poorly last year as well on export. So I don't think that's going to be too bad.
Another interesting dynamic I'm keen to get your thoughts on is I think in Europe, thoughts that the demand for internal combustion engine vehicles has peaked, that it will never be as high as we've seen it maybe in the last few years, and that now, we should see a steady decline. I'm wondering what that is, if that's something that you agree with, and if so, what that means for our ability to keep exporting.
Well, you've asked a very difficult question there because in theory, in 3 weeks' time, the Minister of Finance will give us details of the white paper on electric vehicles. Now, as many people know, 2/3 of South African-made vehicles are exported. Over half of all those vehicles go to countries which will not allow the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles from 2035. So, yeah, we've still got at least one more generation of ICE, as they're called, ICE vehicles to go. So it's probably too soon to see that. I mean, you're absolutely right. ICE vehicles have peaked in Europe, and yet we are seeing in one or two markets like the UK, EV sales are falling off. People are feeling they're being put under too much pressure. So we're in this sort of strange position where ICE will gradually diminish, but there is resistance against it in some markets at the moment.
And also, again, to find, I mean, we've spoken about the finance minister and the certainty that we are expecting in a few weeks, David. Realistically, how much certainty are we expecting?
Not a lot. Okay. He will put some flesh on the bones. I mean, the white paper which came out in November told us pretty much what we knew, but it added a little bit more. Minister Godongwana will put some flesh on the bones. If you talk to the industry, they're not expecting too much flesh. They think it will be later in the year. Because remember, he was supposed to give us the details in February last year and didn't. So they're hopeful, but they're not overwhelmingly positive as to what they're going to find out. I hope they're wrong, because we need them to be wrong.
Absolutely. And before I let you go, I mean, we just spoke to Isuzu. It looks like the automotive sector is still keen on South Africa. And of course, we have this election coming up, and that also takes us to a different kind of uncertainty, different to what we're expecting to be resolved next week with the finance minister. And I'm wondering if, anything could happen in the election that could harm that investment.
Well, let's just say that it would be best if Julius Malema does not become the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. No, I mean, I think people are pretty realistic internationally. They're pretty realistic about what to expect from the election. Whether it's ANC continuing, whether there's a coalition, I think they're pretty realistic, everywhere. So they're not expecting big surprises. I think they've factored in pretty well what those options are afterwards. So no, I don't think there's going to be any dramatic changes in their attitude towards South Africa.
Well, David, looking forward to more chats throughout the year. I know there'll be plenty. Thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure having you with us. That was Editor at Large for Financial Mail, David Furlonger.